Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us this evening. My name is Olivia, and I work here at Town Hall Seattle. And on behalf of Town Hall and our partner bookseller, Third Place Books, it's my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's live stream presentation with Gina G. Warren in conversation with Nicole Graham and Chicken Mike as part of our Arts and Culture series. As we get underway, I would like to acknowledge that our institution stands on the unceded traditional territory of the Coast Salish people, particularly the Duwamish. We thank them for our continued use of the natural resources of their ancestral homeland. Thank you all for tuning in. Town Hall is proud to be a community-focused organization and a place where we can share and sustain ideas and creativity, even if it means we can't gather in person. I'd like to thank Gina, Nicole, and Mike for appearing tonight virtually to help make that possible. If you share in Town Hall's vision for a robust community engaged in the arts, science, and culture where everyone has a voice, please consider supporting us tonight by making a donation or becoming a member. Town Hall is adding new events and podcasts every day. Upcoming programs include Mickey Huff and Andy Lee Roth from Project Censored, which will address the importance of independent journalism and the free press. Sebastian Younger reports on his study of the ever-present human struggle for community and independence. And our Earshot Jazz concert series continues with the Marina Albero Trio presenting stunning jazz piano and hammer dulcimer performances with a Spanish flair. You can check out more of what's upcoming by visiting our online calendar at townhallseattle.org. Tonight's presentation will be about 60 minutes, including Q&A. Questions will be selected from those in the chat field at the bottom of the video player, so please submit those at any time. You can also text questions to 206-504-2857. You can also get that number in the chat. We cannot guarantee that we will be able to address every question, but we will try to get to as many as possible. Please keep your questions concise and in the form of a question so we can get to as many as we can. For those who would like to view the program with closed captions, click the CC button in the bottom right corner of the video player. The program will be available for rewatching immediately following the event. Town Hall's work is made possible through your support and the support of our sponsors. Our Arts and Culture series is supported by For Culture, Arts Fund, Seattle Office of Arts and Culture, the Norcliffe Foundation, and Wyncote Foundation Northwest. Finally, Town Hall is a member-supported organization, so I'd like to thank all of our members watching tonight. One final note, you will want to dive deeper into tonight's conversation by purchasing a copy of the book being presented tonight. Please use the link in the chat below to buy through our partner bookseller, Third Place Books. Now on to tonight's program. Gina G. Warren is a writer from Louisiana. Her topics include animals, the natural world, and human relationships, and her articles have appeared in publications such as Orion, Creative Nonfiction, and Terrain.org. She raises a flock of chickens in her backyard. Husband and wife duo Nicole Graham and Mike, who goes by the moniker Chicken Mike, live in Houston, Texas, and own an urban-based educational chicken business called The Garden Hen. They started their business in 2012, educating youth across Houston and about the life cycle of a chicken. These efforts have spawned a program they bring to students of all ages called Project Life Cycle the Chicken, which has reached over 20,000 students as of spring 2021. Warren's new book, Hatched: Dispatches from the Backyard Chicken Movement, is the subject of this evening's talk. Please join me in welcoming Nicole Graham, Chicken Mike, and Gina Warren.
Howdy, everybody.
Hello.
Sounds working on our end?
Me too. Olivia, thank you so much for that warm introduction. I really appreciate that. And I also want to thank Chicken Mike and Nicole for joining me tonight. I'm so thrilled to have you here, and a huge thank you to everyone watching. I really appreciate everyone taking the time to be a part of this. So one of the things that I became really interested in when I was doing research for this book, which years of research and interviews and being around chickens, was some of the motivations behind the backyard chicken movement. Like, why are people becoming invested in this? Why is this gaining so much traction right now? And so I just want to read a brief passage from the book that kind of skirts around this topic. And then I'm really curious, Chicken Mike and Nicole, to see what you think some of these motivations are. Backyard chickens are on the rise, partially because of the style of living they exemplify, rebels against modern metropolis ails. In the wake of stresses about increased urbanization, environmental collapse, GMO foods, and kids growing up with their fingers on screens instead of in the dirt, chickens are an all-inclusive reprieve. Chicken people tend to have concerns about the environment, industrial food, and the people perform a feat of micro-resistance these dominant forms of consumption and production and create a counter narrative to the story that food, something we all require on a daily basis, can only be produced by certain industries in sequestered spaces. So, I mean, you have both spent years involved in the chicken movement, backyard chicken movement. And I'm really curious, what do you think some of the motivations behind this are?
Well, I'll tell you what my wife, her motivations were exactly something to be out of what every person that has ever gotten a chicken coop from us started with their same motivations. It's one to get back to their roots, knowing where their food comes from, understanding where it comes from, and producing something on their own where they know what they put into that. And I'll tell you, Nicole changed my life on how she brought stuff into our backyard, just out of the chicken, not just the garden in the front yard, but chicken in the backyard does a lot for a family.
And I'm just curious about a little backstory. When did you get your first chicken? Would you mind talking a little bit more about how you got involved with this?
Yes. So with me, it started in childhood. Just like a lot of children do, not so much anymore, but when I was growing up, you used to get baby chicks and bunnies in your Easter basket, and the Easter bunny would bring them, and they would, of course, grow, and then a lot of times they would go to the farm. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I kind of protested a few years into that with my parents. And I said, I don't want my chicken to go to the farm. I want my chicken to stay right here in my backyard. So fast forward to meeting my husband and getting married, I kind of did that little protest again. And I said, well, whether you want to hear this or not, I'm just going to go get chickens and we're going to do this. And he kind of looked at me and said, well, if that's what you really want to do, I support it, but it's all you. And so from that moment on, it wasn't just a hobby, it was a lifestyle. It was something that I completely threw myself into. Backyard self-sustainability, knowing where my food came from. And on top of that, I'm just overall obsessed with the actual chicken itself.
When she said it was all me, do you understand? I wouldn't even touch a chicken at this point. So at this point in my life, I would not touch a chicken. Didn't want to have anything to do with anything other than loading something heavy out of the truck or the car for her to go into the backyard. I didn't want to have anything to do with it. And that's how this all started. And I started to see the transformation in lifestyle, in the way that we could start. Well, I was eating eggs. Okay. Even though I didn't want to do anything about it, I was going to eat the eggs because they were great. So that started with the chickens in the garden, and she basically brought a whole new lifestyle change in our family. And it's been a big deal. It's been a really big deal.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that idea of shifting lifestyle, or you mentioned also like getting back to your roots, engaging in more hands-on practices. I think that's something that's pretty widespread across chicken owners as a motivation for why they get into it. It's interesting because I've wondered a lot about why in the past 20 to 25 years, we've seen an increase in the number of households with backyard chickens. And one of the reasons I've been able to come up with is that there's a little bit of this cultural zeitgeist around sustainability, weariness of certain types of agriculture, wanting to be more self-sufficient, however that, actually plays out. And so it's almost like there's this broader push, and then backyard chickens have situated themselves as a piece within that.
That's like the gateway drug of the backyard sustainability lifestyle. It's like that. Really is. It's that or the garden. The garden can be that way too. And people fear things like Monsanto. They look up in the sky and they fear things, and they may have a reason for wanting to do something on their own. They feel like that they can cultivate without having extra additives put in there they didn't want in there.
I also think there's a tremendous sense of pride that comes with cultivating something on your own and putting all this love and time into it. And then your chicken lays its first egg, your first pepper is grown on, you know, on your pepper plant. Your bees do their first, you know, batch of honey.
It tastes better if you cultivate it.
It does. It does. There is something very, very special about that. And to this day, if you were to ask me to show you a picture of the first egg that was ever laid in my backyard, I would be able to like pull it right up for you. I was so proud of that. And I think that is what is coming over people. I think people just have this, again, sense of wanting to get back to their roots and wanting to know where their food comes from, and no matter what form that may be. It's a sense of pride, responsibility. It is a family involvement that comes with it. I mean, the list, just so many benefits.
Not even to mention, y'all, as parents. So I don't know how many people listening right now are parents, but we use the chickens as a major tool in parenting. You know, to be able to come out and hang out with us and collect eggs, it teaches kids a lot of responsibility. You're into cleaning the chicken coop. You have to care for these animals. And the kids view this as a reward system to interact with the chickens. So we use that in many different tools in our lifestyle with our kids. Our oldest is 17 and our youngest is 5. So we have a really huge spectrum of age ranges. And it's really been a very benefit to our household just having these animals in the backyard as a rearing tool.
Yeah, and I think that's something that I noticed too among other backyard chicken owners was there was a tendency to want to use backyard chickens as a tool for teaching children something important and something unique that maybe wouldn't come from another animal like a cat or a dog or something like a garden.
Exactly.
Well, and another way of looking at it also, when you're talking about children in general, every child has a different way that they learn, whether it's hands-on or hearing or smelling, but touch and visual things of understanding, actually putting your hands on it. I definitely learn better that way myself, but I noticed that with all 3 of my children as well. Hands-on experience, it's something that I would say totally just moves the senses in a way, and you have a much greater respect for things as well to a certain degree.
You can go through many stages of cultivating things if you do it hands-on. You know, I mean, you can read about it, you can watch it on TV, but once you start doing it yourself, you know, you go through all the nuances, you know, from ailments to the chickens, you know, to having a softer shell and having to incorporate something in their diet to make the eggshell proper, you know, and giving these chickens proper sunlight, you know, food, all the different things that go into producing a quality egg are learned as you kind of go a little bit. You know, I mean, everybody has a way that they do things a little bit differently in every backyard. So I talk to people that are on the backyard chicken forums. If I build a coop for a new client, they've never had chickens before, I said, go on the backyard chicken forums and the Facebook or the Instagram groups or whatnot, and start reading what they say, but infer some of your own common sense into it too. You know, because your flock is a little bit different than the flock next door. Everybody's coop is a little bit different, just like everybody's household's a little bit different. You may raise your kids a little different than I raise my kids. That being said, everything can be inferred in a way to where we all have the same goal at hand, but we all have different approaches at getting there, and nobody's approach is really wrong unless they're being hateful. You know what I mean? So you never want to be hateful in those groups, and you want to always encourage people unless they're doing something the wrong way, and then maybe encourage them how to do it in the right way through positive speak and not negative speak. Because I see a lot of negative speak in these Facebook groups, and it sometimes bothers me, you know, and I just have to keep silent and don't like a keyboard bully, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think everybody who's involved in this is, you know, there's a little bit of in it together because chickens are so strange and kind of weird that like the people who love chickens, they'll find probably some common ground. I'm interested.
We see a lot of the common ground. Yes, we do. We see a lot of common ground with chicken lovers. There's a lot to relate to.
Yeah. So I'm interested in it. one of the things you were touching on is the idea of like, there's all these different ways to have chickens. And I believe some of that's a little bit environmental. So the specific challenges of raising chickens are different in San Francisco as they are in Seattle, as they are in Houston. And I think also the motivations for wanting to raise chickens are a little bit different and can be they can be impacted by place. So I'm curious, do you think is there something about Houston that's been conducive to backyard chickens, or maybe a reason why backyard chickens are so beneficial in Houston?
Other than our summers, because it is exceedingly hot down here. We don't have really all 4 seasons to where we don't have a really true winter here. I mean, I know we had this freeze that everybody saw on the news and all that a couple of months ago, but the chickens down here, if you can escape the heat, you can actually have egg production longer down here in Houston than you could maybe up north where you have a harsher winter. That being said, we're working on things to keep chickens cooler down here in the summer heat, which is things like we'll talk about later. But I'm telling you right now, I think you have more egg production down here because we have a little bit warmer climate that is more conducive to a longer egg production. You know, like when it gets cold, nobody wants to go outside and lay an egg. I mean, I know I don't. So it's really tough when it's cold, you know, to walk outside, you know, to make that happen. But when it's a little bit warmer, you can put things in the diet. You can give them supplemented fans and different ventilation streams to where it makes them relatively cool enough to where they're not overly heated, but they're still in egg production.
Yeah. Yeah. That warm weather and like sunlight here is so important.
It is. Seattle,
Very
I
important.
think y'all have like not very much sunlight compared to what we have down here. Is this correct? I mean, y'all have a lot of rainy days up there in Seattle. So I think that is definitely going to affect the egg production. Or do chickens adapt up there in Seattle, you know, to where it kind of balances out and maybe there's an adaptation to where certain breeds and certain aspects of chickens have adapted a little bit up there, you know, to where maybe if you throw those Seattle chickens that are in your backyard and then down here in Houston, are they going to have the same egg production over a year that they would vice versa? You know, like if we swap chicken flocks.
Oh, well, I think that chickens are actually quite versatile, meaning that they can adapt to certain climates, tendencies, things of that nature. I do believe that there are certain breeds of chicken that are predisposed to doing a lot better in warmer climates versus cooler and cooler versus warmer. And obviously, you know, what chicken owners do is they provide for their flock or provide for their animals. So if you lived in a cooler climate, you're not going to have a summery, lofty coop where you would have all this north wind flying through there and your chickens are just sitting there shaking, you know, versus here you do have a lofty, much more open air concept, ventilated coop. Exactly.
That's a good point. No, she's right. We built a coop in Colorado and we had to build the way that we built the chicken coop a lot different in Colorado than when we built one here in Houston.
Well, and the predatory, you know, that, you know, while backyard chickens kind of on a little bit of tangent there, you also have stressors that would affect your flocks, determining, you know, meaning where you live. So for instance, he stated we built a coop in Colorado. Well, they have bears among many other wildlife there that are predatory.
We don't have bears in Houston.
Yes. And when you think of stressors, that actually will pull back laying potential, because if a chicken is stressed and not happy, just like humans, we don't function properly if we're stressed out or upset. Chickens are the same way. You know, they do
so
not thrive
a
in
bear
stress.
lurking at night, you know, might throw a chicken off on production, just like any predator here, even in Houston. Like if a bobcat was circling our coop at night here in the backyard, and we didn't know about it, but we do have cameras, you would throw off egg production at that point. So there's different stressors in all different environments, you know, and you just have to adhere to them.
Yeah, absolutely. There's something that I want to make sure we talk about. So I'm going to change gears a little bit, but I think it definitely relates to this idea that there are specific local concerns bounded in different places. And so I would like to talk a little bit about regulations, because I know this is something that you both know very much about. And before we get too much into discussing maybe different regulations in different places, what the regulations in Houston are, I want to talk just a bit about the history of these kinds of regulations that keep animals like chickens outside of city spaces or limit their ability to be there in some way. It used to be much more common to have animals in cities, productive animals in cities. And obviously now we're seeing the backyard chicken movement really counter that. But it was in the late 19th and earliest 20th century that zoning ordinances began banning most livestock in cities and urban spaces. Part of this was a project of creating more of a distinction between places where people were living and places where food was produced. This happened across the United States over a period of time. Things like the Piggery War in Manhattan in 1859. And then also in Chicago, there was a lot of pressure to eliminate chickens from city spaces. And one of the consistent pieces about the project that I think is really important when we understand regulations around backyard chickens today and their history is that eliminating animals from these spaces was often targeted at low-income neighborhoods. It was often targeted at neighborhoods with high immigrant populations. And this project was a little bit of a gentrification project. There were other motivations, but this was something that was bound up in it. So for example, I mentioned Chicago in 1909, the Daily Chicago Tribune published an article that said, I have a quote here, "Wherever immigrants stand on the lowest scale of industry life, thousands of chickens are being raised." So really binding up these perceptions of chickens with class and race and ethnicity, and targeting already vulnerable populations through banning animals, through banning chickens and other forms of livestock. So I think that for me, that informs some of the way that I look at backyard chicken ordinances. Not that backyard chicken ordinances are bad or should all be abolished. I do not believe that. But I do think understanding some of the initial motivations is helpful. So I'm curious if you would maybe want to talk a little bit about what some regulations are, especially for people who aren't familiar with backyard chickens, because I do believe that we have some here who aren't. But what are some of the regulations that backyard chicken owners today generally face?
So just a little side note, because you're exactly right about the way that the landscape was changing in real estate across the United States was putting farmers further out and bringing city lots in. For instance, in Houston, we started zoning and rezoning 4,500 and 6,500 square foot lots in the Galleria area in like the early 30s and 40s. And in the Galleria area, I don't know if you realize where that is in Houston. It's a very affluent area here in Houston. It's our highest in retail. It's where all the big, Gucci stores and Chanel and all that stuff are. That is where people were starting to farm then, right? They then pushed them even further down Westheimer, which Westheimer became like a dairy run, is what they used to call Westheimer, which is our largest retail street probably in Houston. That was a dairy run. And it all started from them starting to zone the 4,500 and 6,500 square foot lots to start these traditional houses with backyards that you see today. Okay, and that's a little history on Houston, which is exactly right what you're saying.
Incidentally, when the bylaws were written as well.
And what's funny and ironic is that it kind of interludes where we are today. Those rules have stayed in place here in Houston from then. So we have a problem in Houston that we've worked very closely with the city, and the city is very affectionate to our concern. We have a problem in Houston where you have to have 100 foot from your neighbor's dwelling to have your chicken coop. Nicole and I are responsible for 250 plus chicken coops in backyards here in Houston, in the greater Houston area right now as we speak. And I'd say 80% are illegal by the city standards. by the city's bylaws that are written from the 40s. They are illegal. The bylaws have been tweaked a little bit. They used to incorporate that you could have a rooster. Now they scratched that red line. You can have a rooster, which is a very, very rational law. In the city, there should be no roosters. There's no reason to have a rooster.
Especially if you're only going for egg production.
Exactly. And so that being said, now the city sits at a place where they have not changed the 100-foot rule. They have not changed the amount of hens you can have. I think you can actually have more hens than what I think you should
30.
Probably have in a backyard. On a regular 4,500 square foot lot. I do believe that there should be smaller flocks, and we should work with something around 6 to 8 chickens, on the regular city lots, and have no roosters. And what Nicole and I have done today is help the city rewrite the laws. And we're working extremely close with the city and are extremely thankful that the city's listening to us, but even though it moves at a snail's pace, about changing those bylaws. So they're just antiquated and they need to be readdressed right now.
Yeah, definitely. And I also appreciate how you talked about that they haven't changed in a really long time, which is often the case with some of these regulations. And then also you mentioned that regulations will focus on like number of hens that you have, on presence of roosters, and often proximity to neighbors. And I've seen too, sometimes proximity to other structures. So manipulating things in those ways.
Yes. Schools.
Yeah, so we've had some really interesting builds. So we have built a chicken coop for the city on a Laura lot, and I don't really want to say it's like for the city, but it was used with an educational purpose from grant money that we received, and that all came through the city of Houston. So we did build a chicken coop, and it doesn't necessarily fit the city's guidelines. Our mayor did come to it. He looked at me and he said, "Chicken Mike, I get this. We need to change these rules. We need to make this accessible for kids in the neighborhood." A lot of these kids live in what we call food deserts. And we've talked about this, Gina, you and I have talked about this numerous times. And it's mine and Nicole's largest passion is to teach these kids that live in a food desert how to cultivate an egg on their own, because the gardens can grow. You can cultivate an egg on your own. You can even have some bees if you have the right setup. And then you can do plenty in the backyard, living in a food desert, that you don't have to rely on somebody else to produce something for you. You can go ahead and do it on your own, which teaches many skill sets across the board.
And the reality is, in a large city such as Houston and among many other cities, there is a reality that a lot of these young individuals that we do teach this practice to may not be equipped or live in the correct setting, meaning we don't necessarily say that everybody needs to do chickens, because the reality is not everybody can. But if everybody kind of did the one thing, and whether that's a potted tomato plant or an herb garden or things of that nature that are best suited for whatever the environment may be, we feel like, in lower income areas, particularly food deserts for that matter, where name brand grocery stores are not very prevalent. A lot of the individuals that live in these lower income areas have to go to the gas station or a corner store to get their produce and their eggs and their milk.
The quality of product is not there.
It's not there, versus when we talked earlier about, enthusiasm and passion and teaching these kids a tool. These kids gain this amount of respect from being hands-on. And again, whether it's watering a tomato plant or you are raising your chickens or you have bees, it's respect. It's a way to barter, meaning, and
eventually
yes.
Apartment complexes, it doesn't matter if you have a backyard or not. So it just depends on the vision of the developer. So we built chicken coops for entire communities where the chicken coop was centered around a community. So meaning like a community here in Houston called Harvest Green. Your HOA dues go to a local farm that the entire community is built around. And in the center of that is a chicken coop, and it's this giant working farm. And Messina Hop just came and threw a winery down. So I think the residents are getting wine too, which is kind of a cool thing. You're getting wine, garden, and eggs. I mean, how could you go wrong with your HOA dues? That's going to something positive. It's changing lifestyles. And these folks, they can't have a chicken in their backyard, and that's what the HOA says right now. But the HOA is providing the quality egg and the produce and all that. So once we get developers that are building apartment complexes and we're starting to rethink the way we develop our lifestyles, we will then start affording everybody an opportunity for fresh products, even if they can't cultivate it on their own little square lot.
But that's the reason for utilizing these Laura lots that don't have anything on them. You can create community gardens, responsibilities, jobs where people can work to take home food for that day. There's endless possibilities.
Yeah, and I think too, I mean, the United States is experiencing a trend where community gardens have been on the rise.
Mm-hmm.
There seems to be a recognition of individuals too, of like, yes, I would like to participate in these things, I have access to these things. And I think you're absolutely right that not everyone either has the, the drive, desire, wish, need to raise chickens. And providing more community-based spaces can be a really wonderful way to still have that experience, even if you're not going to be individually participating with it.
Well, you got to think about this
so
too.
Out of curiosity.
Well, one more thing, you got to think about this too. So for the elderly, I mean, we obviously don't want to give them more jobs. I mean, so like these Laura lots, these empty city lots, can be used for almost exclusively, like one lot could be for an elderly group that lives in the community in Fifth Ward out here in the hood, right here where we have in Houston, or one could be for an elementary school that doesn't have the footprint to have a chicken coop in a garden, or the extra expenses. You can go on and on about like what the different empty spaces we can really utilize in the cities for. But I will say we really are excited about where our city is going in participating with gardening on these empty city lots.
What do you think, and this is a very kind of abstract question, so feel free to be as abstract or concrete as you would like to. What do you think would happen if Houston got rid of the regulations that it has around backyard chickens, maybe utilize some of these spaces in the way that you're talking about? What do you think would change? What do you think might happen?
So Nicole and I have actually outlined this for the city. In our opinion, what would change, and what we think would change is that an overall feel that it really isn't crazy to have chickens in your backyard, because I think we're the third largest city in America, and by placing as many coops as we put in backyards here in Houston, some people look at me like, dude, you're crazy, or some people look at me like, that's brilliant. So you have the spectrum, on both sides. You're going to have more of an understanding of people wanting to be happier about knowing where their food comes from. That being said, what would happen is I think a lot more education would happen. I think a lot more cohesion would happen with our food deserts. I think a lot of change would happen in those areas where we are short-sighted because we don't have an empathy of understanding firsthand. I think by Nicole and I understanding firsthand, by educating so many students that live in food deserts, we understand a need. So what changes is the narrative may change to where there's a paradigm shift in understanding that how we place food as a whole for people, that we believe food at an equal, healthier value should be distributed in an equal, healthier region in the same distribution, very evenly. So I think that would change. I'd love to be the first ever chicken commissioner of a city. I mean, I think we honestly need a backyard chicken commissioner that could in place some logical rules and have educational opportunities for people to become better chicken owners and better chicken neighbors. If you're going to own a chicken, you want to be a good chicken neighbor. You don't want to be a terrible owner to where your neighbor's pissed off at you all the time,
Yeah, exactly. And I think that this idea of building spaces and then also building in resources kind of segues to another thing that I would like to discuss is community in the backyard chicken movement, and this idea of community there. So, I mean, and we met also through a community chicken event. We met at Tour de Coop, and there are these Tour de Coop events across the United States. They're in a lot of major cities. As far as my understanding, most were suspended because of COVID-19 recently. I believe there were some virtual events, but we met prior to the pandemic in an in-person one. And they're usually day-long events where people will bike, walk, or drive to different coops that sign up to be on the tour. And the coop owners, house owners, they're there and they'll talk to you about the chickens, talk to you about their setup, share information about what works, what doesn't, and then also usually just kick back and talk about environmentalism and sustainability and some really cool topics with you. So could you maybe speak a little bit about, because you were involved pretty heavily in the Tour de Coop in Houston, could you tell us a little bit about that, and maybe also touch on how you see backyard chicken owners building community? It can be in other ways besides the cool coop tours.
For sure. No, Nicole and I were super proud to put on. That was the first ever event Nicole and I have ever done ourselves. We never really tried anything like that. We were really outside of our box. We had some really great sponsors, and like one of them was Sprouts Farmers Market. We had a beer and a liquor sponsor, which were great. That drives crowds. That being said, we were really proud of the tour because it gives people an aspect. And I can't tell you how many people went on that tour that have come to us now and are building a chicken coop in their backyard. I mean, that list is just, it goes on. I mean, I bet we have 10 plus people that were on that tour that have come to us and were like, hey man, we totally did the tour. We didn't have chickens before, but this got us over the edge. You got us, it's like an icebreaker for sustainability and a lifestyle. And so what we did was we just picked 7 of the houses that we built chicken coops at. And, we opened it up for other people that, wanted to display their coop that we didn't build. So that's never going to be a stipulation. But we just had 7 really cool coops that you could tour. You had a bus. You could either hop on the bus, get free booze so you weren't drinking and driving, or you could do what you said and hop on your bike, because we had them all within one community, which is called the Heights of Houston. And we had some interesting coops. We had coops that had pedestals that are right below living room windows where the kids feed the chickens treats out the house window, to ones that had reading nooks on top of the chicken coop where the kids literally, this is one of our oldest coops. It's like about 8 years old now. And these kids started off in middle school with a reading nook on top of their chicken coop. They were avid readers. They're already graduated from high school now, and they still go up on top of the chicken coop and hang out all the time. I hope they're still reading books up there, but But it was fun. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I was just going to add, that is the only coop that I've ever seen with a reading nook, and I've seen lots of backyard chicken coops.
And actually, since you have been there, the wonderful lady that supported us and offered up her amazing space actually expanded that coop. She actually wrapped the chicken coop completely around her garage and built a massive run. And she, I must say, has one of the most efficient and amazing utilization of spaces. Because one of the biggest problems we have here with a lot of individuals that have yard space, some of them really don't have yards in certain areas of town. So when you can be sufficient and utilize your entire yard to suit your needs, which she did, it's an incredible thing.
One of the reasons why we offer a free consultation, so when we build the coops, we go in their backyard, it's a free consultation, because really it gets my juices and mine and Nicole's juices flowing when we can see the yard, get our feet on the ground, put 10 toes down, understand we can have a game plan to whatever your lifestyle is, because everybody's lifestyle is different. You're not going to want to necessarily put the chicken coop right by the pool. You know what I mean? So you got to kind of change it up every now and again, and it has to fit the lifestyle of the family every time.
Yeah. So I think we're getting close to the Q&A section of this event. And so if you have questions, you can submit them in the chat. And I think we'll get to as many as we can. But is there anything else that you think is really important to add to this conversation about backyard chickens?
Well, I mean, I think a lot of it is the education movement, like you asking what's going to change. I think that's probably something I'd rather reiterate on one more time. I think that the more schools Nicole and I reach, we've reached like 20,000 students with our hatching program. at every age. I mean, from Rice University to elementary schools. It's beneficial to everybody to understand the misconceptions of chickens, even if they're not interested in them. I think it should be taught in a curriculum in our schools. 4-H doesn't really have, 4-H is like an agricultural program here in Texas. They don't really have an urban chicken section. You know, like we're being taught how to cultivate things on a smaller scale. You know, and these poultry, these animals, some of the livestock that we have don't necessarily have to have as much room as people think that we do on a perception of watching a cartoon and thinking that, you know, you need a large farm to have chickens. A lot of these people don't understand. We teach so many students and the teachers don't know a lot of the basic facts of a chicken's life cycle, and we eat so many eggs. Like, think about how many eggs are consumed in our nation on a daily basis.
Chicken
And chicken. I mean, I eat chicken every day. So
I mean, but the reality that we're also facing, I think, is why education is so important, is the factor of fear mongering. And I will use that term and not very loosely, because I feel like it is kind of thrown around, especially in the poultry community, relatively easily.
So, I mean, the CDC comes out with an annual salmonella article every year around this time. I mean, it just came out again. It's almost like the most recycled thing I've ever seen in my life. And I'm not capping on the CDC. I think they do a really good job. But I think a lot of that may be driven in other areas to where, you know, I've seen things firsthand, you know, from at the state capitol in Austin when we went to speak on Senate Bill 86, which died, you know, a couple of years ago. And there's been another chicken bill since then. We had one person opposing us as we spoke on the Senate floor, and this dude was totally big chicken. I mean, I'm saying, like, he was so big chicken. He was representing large, big chicken corporation and was extremely opposing a backyard flock of 6 chickens. I mean, like, dude, what is 6 chickens going to hurt your corporation for? We're all going to eat chicken. It's not like we're asking to produce meat birds in a backyard and start slaughtering birds in our backyard.
Well,
that's not what we're asking right now. We're just looking for eggs.
A lot of chicken enthusiasts are in it for the eggs and the companionship. The reality is, while, you know, those practices may be building in large quantities, meaning there's a movement, and there's been a movement that, you know, such as you said, for the past 25 to almost going on 30 years now, people have been moving back to that get back to your roots mentality. It's just one of those things that I feel like, you know, again, fear mongering, really, they're trying to utilize it as a tool extremely negatively. Now, I'm not telling people don't, you know, obviously don't kiss your chicken, meaning don't put them in your face, don't.
We don't even believe chickens really need to be inside either.
Exactly.
You know, we believe chickens are a backyard animal. And I'm not saying that people that bring their chicken inside are not sanitary in some way. It's just that we believe chickens are a backyard animal that deserve a lifestyle that is conducive to a backyard. And that's what's best for them too, as well. You know, it's really not great to have them inside for prolonged periods of time. So that being said, we think that definitely is one thing that we've always thought is education. We'll always go back to the education.
Important.
I can't see the questions, so if we got questions, can you prompt me? I don't know.
I cannot see the questions either. I will if they pop up. I believe Olivia is back to ask those.
Yeah, I can ask some of the questions. Thank you both, or all three of you, so much. This has been a really great conversation. Just circling back on a question that came in about exposing kids to chickens. The question is, do you bring kids to visit your chickens? But also, I think sort of on the bigger picture, how do you get kids interacting with chickens just on a really practical level?
Yeah, so this totally adheres to the project life cycle. I'll tell you what that is and break it down for y'all. So it's a hatching project in a classroom where we bring an incubator with about 7 eggs per incubator. We set that in the classroom and the teachers give it a curriculum. Our curriculum now comes in English and Spanish, and Nicole and I own the curriculum. All the pictures proprietary. We're very proud that we were able to do that recently. And we're able to offer it now in Spanish, which changes the game as well. That the chicken actually hatch out in the classroom for the kids. They're able to see it, they're able to understand it, they're able to take these daily charts with our curriculum. And then during the time, it's a 21-day period where they hatch. During that time, we schedule an event with the students called our chicken coop tour, chicken coop demo. And we have our therapy chicken, Pinecone, and y'all can look her up. She's really cool. She's got her own Instagram too, Pinecone _ the chicken. She goes into schools and she talks to the kids indirectly through Nicole and I about her chicken coop and the different facets of her coop, how that's in a backyard, the three main factors of a chicken coop, which is your roosting bar, ventilation, and then a nesting box. Those are the three main factors of a coop. We talked about to the kids. We teach them how we're doing that in a backyard. And it really blows their mind because we relate it to, you know, the dogs and the cats. And we talk to them about, you know, you give your dog or cat a heartworm pill every month. They're like, yeah, well, you do the same thing with the chicken, but you actually naturally worm them with things like cayenne pepper, apple cider vinegar, garlic, pumpkin seeds. And these are natural tools you can feed the chicken to worm them to where you don't have to feed them a medicine and then lay off the eggs for 45 days, because we don't want a bunch of medicine in our body. So the least amount of medicines we can put into the chicken is going to give us a quality egg. And so those are just some of the stuff that we teach the kids in that education program. And they all, you know, they all get to meet Pinecone and pet her, and it's like a big deal to pet Pinecone. It's like a huge deal. We have lines of kids of like 300 just literally come by and pet Pinecone.
And cool. Even more so when they are, which our incubators that we use are clear. You can see everything going on, the rotation, every facet of it. The looks on their faces when they see that egg pit for the first time and they see that baby come out, it just sets them ablaze. And what I mean by that, just excitement of life.
Well, what also happens too is once the babies hatch out, the kids get to watch them and observe them in a classroom for about a week or so. The teachers usually for about 7 to 10 days, that's about the window that the teachers like them for. And the kids have this huge sense of pride because we build up to them that they got to get these chickens back to Chicken Mike's farm. So it gives them a responsibility aspect, and they feel really, really proud when they, you know, we come to pick the chicks up. They have a sense of like I've said, pride in being able to help us cultivate that process as well.
Very cool. Another question for all three of you. If you could just give the short list of the most important things that someone should have in their backyard environment that would make it appropriate for chickens and make it a good idea. Like if the person's excited about it, but if you have a short list of things people should look out for in their own backyard environment that would make it conducive to chickens.
Yeah, I think a secure coop. A secure coop is probably the most important thing. Once you have a secure coop, you can kind of get creative from there on out and put your flair on things.
Yeah, I think secure coops are really important too. And also I would maybe include, and this isn't exactly like a structural piece, but I think being willing to keep them clean and engage with them is maybe one of the most important aspects. In addition to be able to keep them safe from predators, and then providing them with things like nest boxes and, you know, consistent access to clean food and water. Making sure that you're kind of along for the ride. And I think something that a lot of people don't necessarily understand when they get backyard chickens is that they will not lay eggs for their entire life cycle. So there's going to be a time when you have non-productive chickens that you need to feed and keep safe and keep clean, and you will not be getting an egg. So having something in place for that, you know, inevitable time in your relationship with your chicken, I think is really important. That means different things for different people, but having something that you know you'll do, or being ready to take care of an unproductive chicken, which also happens. I have a couple of them.
We just put her to work. And so we're getting plenty of production out of her. No more eggs, not very many eggs, but just work. She's a work chicken now.
That's great. So that was our last question. Are any final thoughts before we close out for the evening?
Well, before we close out, I would really like to thank everyone again. Chicken Mike, Nicole, thank you so much for being here. And Town Hall Seattle, thank you so much for having us. And also thank you everyone who came here tonight.
Super excited to talk to
Absolutely, big
everybody.
thank you to everybody. So deeply appreciative to be included and embark on such a fun event.
And hey, y'all get the book. This is a great read. I'm telling
Yes.
y'all, this is a great read. It is a great read.
Yeah. On behalf of Town Hall, I will second that. Go grab the book. We have a link pinned in the chat to purchase it through our partner bookseller, Third Place Books. And once again, thank you all so much for being here this evening. It was a pleasure, and have a great evening.
Great, thank you.
Thank you guys.